Welcome to Global Express, where we look at events that impact our neighborhood. I'm Neena Gopal. This week, there are a multiplicity of crises across the world. Loud whispers of a military coup brewing in Bangladesh, an anti-Hamas protest by Palestinians in Gaza, the hugely embarrassing leak on Signal Chat of US attack plans on the Houthis in Yemen, which has put Donald Trump's intelligence and security team on the spot. And Europe is facing a resurgent nuclear Russia. Ukraine and Russia are negotiating a peace deal, but as French President Emmanuel Macron said at the Paris summit with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky standing by his side, the US president's push for Europe to take charge of its own security could give nuclear Russia with 6,000 nuclear warheads the upper hand. That's a big question. But the most intriguing player on this chessboard is Turkey, sitting on the Eurasia Mideast geopolitical fault line. Turkey, which has mastered the art of geopolitical balancing, is the only country that has kept both Moscow and Kyiv on side. The only country that has armed Ukraine and also thwarted Russia's expansion to the west and to the south. The only country that is seeking to spread its influence across the Middle East and West Asia and challenges Iran. But this is also a Turkey that seems to have serious internal problems. There's been an explosion of violence on the streets after the arrest of a mayor who poses a challenge to the Turkish President Recep Erdogan, his ambition to be president for life. Complicating matters further is the unexpected overture by Erdogan to Kurdish leader Abdullah Ocalan only weeks ago to end a long-running conflict with the Kurdish people, which saw Ocalan in turn offer to dissolve the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. But here's the snag. While the PKK declared a ceasefire, Turkish forces continue to bomb the Kurdish enclave of Rojava and in northern Iraq and Syria. Could the growing protests, the continuing attacks on the Kurdish enclave of Rojava spell the end to this Ocalan overture? Is Turkiye trapped in a trap of its own making? Talking to us today on the impact of the Turkish implosion and the Kurdish hopes for peace are two experts. Brigadier Rumel Dahiya. He served as Deputy Director General at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi, an Indian Army veteran with extensive command and staff experience as a military diplomat in strategic affairs and in counter-insurgency operations. He served as India's defense attaché to Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon, and with the Indian military training team in Bhutan. He's also served with the Military Operations Directorate of the Indian Army and the Net Assessment Directorate at Integrated Defense Staff. Also with us today is an authentic Kurdish voice. Meghan Bodette is Director of Research at the Kurdish Peace Institute, Washington. Her research focuses on Kurdish issues with the focus on human rights, peace and democracy, women's rights, and Turkey's cross-border military operations in Iraqi Kurdistan and northern Syria. She's the first point of reference for government officials and international institutions on her findings, and is the face and voice on US media, including NPR and now this. Welcome, Ms. Bodette.
Thank you for having me.
Let us start with you, Ms. Bodette. Much of what is happening in Turkey is not familiar territory to our viewers. So could you explain who the Kurds are? What is at the heart of this dispute with Turkey? Why does Ocalan have such a following among the Kurds? Why is he such an iconic figure? And the story of Ocalan being hunted down, taken captive in Nairobi in Kenya in 1999, imprisoned alone in this island prison ever since. That's a story in itself.
Yeah, of course. Glad to give background, and thank you everyone for listening. So the modern Kurdish question starts in the early 20th century after World War I and the division of the Ottoman Empire by European powers. You know, with viewers here in South Asia certainly recognizing the impact of British and other European colonialism on regional developments, the Middle East was also shaped by those dynamics at the time. And so the Kurdish people, a nation of about 40 million, were ultimately divided in between the new nation states of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, with the largest population, about half of them, total about 20 million, being located in what is now the borders of Turkey. And then those four nation states were all extremely nationalistic and extremely authoritarian, both denying the existence of their Kurdish populations and closing democratic paths for Kurdish populations to challenge that denial of their identity and find political recognition by political legal means. This led to Kurdish rebellions. And throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, there were Kurdish uprisings in Turkey, in Iran, and then as we go through the 60s and 70s, Iraq becomes the main focus. You might have heard about the Iraqi Kurdistan region, which is today the only part of Kurdistan, or the only Kurdish population to have formal autonomy. And so throughout the 20th century, these Kurdish uprisings continue to take place, and the regimes of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria continue to suppress them. Now,
So you're
the
basically
story
saying
of,
that it's a long and protracted kind of
yeah,
war, basically, against the Iraqis and obviously Turkey. But on the
yeah, yeah,
actual overture now to Ocalan, there's been a 10-year
yeah.
break since the last negotiating process. So you're saying that even though there was conflict between the Turkey government and the Kurdish people, there were overtures made in the past, but it
Yes.
all ended badly.
Exactly. So this has been a long-running conflict in all four of these countries. We'll get to Syria a bit later. The conflict in Turkey has been going on since 1984, which was when the PKK took up arms. So Abdullah Ocalan founded the PKK in 1978, and he's seen as not only a political and military leader for millions of Kurds who support his movement, but his political philosophy has inspired many people around the world, and he has an incredible symbolic status, both for his political and military achievements and for the ideas that he has, put out into the Kurdish struggle. So in 1978, he founds the PKK. In 1980, there's a military coup in Turkey, and the situation gets even more repressive. As a reaction to this, the PKK launches its first armed attacks on the Turkish military in 1984. And now that conflict continues and intensifies. Kurds join the PKK in support and also start organizing in their communities. And by 1993, about 10 years in, Öcalan calls a ceasefire for the first time. The Turkish state reaches out for the first time, and there's the first attempt at negotiations. Since
I
then,
see.
this conflict has been in a period of.
This was the first time that the Turkish government, who was it led by at that point?
At this point, this was going on both sides. It was the Turkish government under Turgut Özal, and to this day, he died just weeks, a month or so after this initiative became public. And so the talks, never progressed, and there's still a lot of discussion over the circumstances of that until now. But that was the first attempt. That was, over 30 years ago. And since then, there have been periods of conflict and periods of negotiations wherein both sides have come to the table.
Yeah, that's great. That's very interesting. But can we come back to the present day and, on the actual overture now to Öcalan? What made Turkey decide to start negotiations now?
So Erdogan is Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's been in power since 2002, has exhausted the number of presidential terms that he can run for under Turkey's presidential system, which he and his party created in, I believe, 2017. And in order to run again, he has to change the constitution. And his alliance, made up of his ruling AKP, which is a sort of Islamist party, and then the MHP, which is an ultra-right Turkish nationalist party, they don't have enough votes in the parliament to change the constitution by themselves. So Erdogan is looking for...
a deal. This is a deal.
Yeah. He wants Kurdish support to change the constitution. Yeah.
So if I can just bring in the Brigadier on this, because, it's obvious there was more to this than meets the eye. The fact that he was reaching out to Öcalan and offering, but Öcalan himself has offered to dissolve the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which was quite a gesture on his part. Don't you think so, Brigadier? Because, I mean, why would he go that far in making such a, move?
I think this is a complex subject, ma'am. First is that Öcalan has been, incarcerated in a solitary confinement at Imrli for such a long time. Also, officially at least, he is not the head of PKK or the Kurdish Workers' Party. So the real representative of the Kurds in Turkey was Selahattin Demirtas, who himself has been, put in jail on charges of supporting PKK, etc. This is a travesty of justice, but well, that's what has been happening in Turkey for such a long time. I think our co-panelist has very rightly said that Erdogan is not satisfied with more than 20 years of his rule as Prime Minister and President, Executive President. He wants it to prolong it. Next elections are due in 2028. By all indications, he wants to change the constitution and try and be a good boy, not take any undemocratic measures. And for that, he would require the Turkish votes.
Yes.
Even if the issue is taken for referendum, it will require a referendum to change the constitution because he doesn't have that kind of a majority in the parliament. He has 60%, he'll get 60%, they go to the people. And if the Kurds support him, then obviously he'll change the constitution, he'll remove the term limit. Although, of course, he has another tool at his disposal, and that tool is to resign before 2028 and seek re-election thereafter. The constitution permits that. So he can resign earlier. And people say that the jailing of Ekrem İmamoğlu now is meant to serve these two purposes. Either CHP breaks and doesn't remain effective opposition, and Ekrem İmamoğlu, with the help of supportive judiciary, is jailed for life or jailed for many years and therefore disqualified.
So obviously this man is seen as a threat by Erdogan. İmamoğlu is obviously seen as the main threat to his re-election.
He is charismatic. He has won the election to Istanbul municipality thrice, including defeating Mr. Yildirim, who was Prime Minister under Erdogan. So he is hugely popular. And he's connected to business community as well. His wife is smart. He connects very well with the students, the young people. So he's the main opposition leader today. And so he's wanting to take him out of the system. That is one. And if he fails ultimately, then of course he will exercise the third option of dissolving the elections earlier, while this fellow İmamoğlu is still under judicial cloud.
Ms. Bodette, if I can come back to you on the key question, why is Öcalan playing ball with Erdogan?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons. First, as I mentioned, he has been trying to, negotiate for over 30 years now, since 1993. And he's expressed from the beginning that armed struggle for Kurds wasn't a first choice, but a necessity. So he and the PKK feel like they've had to take up arms because of the lack of any rights or freedoms for Kurds in Turkey and in general. But if possible, they want to solve this by political means. Now, I think he's choosing to engage for some specific reasons at this current point in time. One is northern Syria. It's been known for a long time that Turkey attacks Syrian Kurds because Turkey sees them as extensions of the PKK and because Turkey fears Kurdish self-governance on its border. This is why Turkey supported radical Islamist groups in Syria. This is why Turkey, refused to play ball with the global coalition during the fight against ISIS, when the entire world was united against the ISIS threat. Turkey has used all kinds of means at its disposal to prevent Syrian Kurds from getting some kind of status.
In fact, the Syrian Kurds, if I'm sorry to interrupt, did get a lot of credit for fighting ISIS.
Yeah, they did. They were extremely successful in that. And that was, something that made even Turkey more secure, because people in Turkey were threatened by ISIS too. But Erdogan's government preferred to support these radical groups rather than allow, democratic, secular Kurds fighting for women's rights, for religious freedom, to gain anything. So this was really concerning. And I'll just finish up this point that, Turkey's strategy in Syria has been based on preventing Kurds from gaining status. And now, with the fall of Bashar al-Assad and, the new Syrian transitional government, I think Öcalan and the PKK know that making a deal in Turkey will help Syrian Kurds get the best deal possible to be a part of the future Syria. And we've seen that play out with the new agreement between the SDF and the transitional government. That's part of it. I think also, this conflict has gone on for a very long time in Turkey. And even in a very difficult situation, Kurds have a lot of political and social institutions that they didn't in 1978 or in 1984. So I think he and the PKK believe that the Kurdish community has reached the level where violence is no longer necessary and where they can, pursue their struggle by political means.
Brigadier, what do you have to say about this? Because, while that sounds, like very progressive and very forward-looking to reach out, but the point is that while this is going on, the people in Rojava are still struggling. They're still being attacked. So, is Erdogan's plan to talk peace but make war?
Erdogan is very flexible. Others call him shifty. He can change his positions very quickly. Last time also, when he was trying to talk to Öcalan and the Kurds in 2015, the talks collapsed. And they collapsed not because the Kurds were not really cooperative, but they collapsed because he wanted to make deal with MHP, MHP, as they call it in Turkey. So he wanted to do that. So therefore, Erdogan can change his positions very quickly. The thing now is this, that Rojava is also not sure presently as to how Trump is going to be behaving with them.
Yes, that's very critical.
When Trump was leaving this presidency, first-time presidency, at that time, he had shut his eyes and Erdogan sent his forces into northern Syria. And in fact, he said that we have no equity in Syria at all, and therefore I don't want any American soldiers on the Syrian soil. Now, Rojava people are also not sure whether Trump might shift his position again there. In any case, I think Erdogan has managed to neutralize the Kurds in Iraq.
I see.
Wherein the present dispensation is not supporting Rojava at all. They are at Dagazron. So therefore, I think Öcalan also thinks, Öcalan must be tired also. Öcalan must be thinking, or in his solitary cell, he must have come to realize that armed resistance is going to get many more Turks killed. Since Turkey has almost a free hand now in Syria and Iraq, besides Turkey itself, northeastern Turkey itself. Because if you remember, a large number of elected mayors have been removed from their positions and put in jail.
That's right. That's right.
So the Turkish armed forces and the police have been given extensive powers to demolish homes, to arrest people. And therefore, I think there must be a realization in his mind also. I think he must be thinking that instead of continuing with the violence, let's try and talk sense. Although I have a feeling that in Syria, presently Turkey seems to have all the cards with it. And because Ahmed al-Shara depended on their support to continue struggling in Idlib.
So in fact, Erdogan has reached out to Ahmed al-Shara.
Yeah, obviously, not only reached out, he's his man. He's his man.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Okay. Yes, Hakan Fidan, who as director of MIT, used to send arms to the resistance groups in that place. He is the foreign minister now.
So that's right. He was a former intelligence chief.
Exactly. So he's the former national intelligence chief. So therefore, Erdogan controls Shara presently. Now, this situation might change after some time because of two reasons. One, continued pressure from Israel in the south, and a bit of a competition between Israel and Turkey. But more importantly, for reconstruction of Syria, Syrian leadership will require money. And that money can only come from Kuwait, no, not Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. And they are not going to give that money if Turkey is the only interlocutor with regard to Syria. They would like to have their say in that area before they start putting in money. As you know, Turkey presently has no money to invest. Net foreign exchange balance with Turkey is zero today, if not in
I
minus.
see. Okay.
Yes, and that is why if you see the Turkish lira has depreciated from two at the time of Gezi Park agitation in 2013, 2 liras to a US dollar to 38 liras today, 19 times depreciation in 12 and a half years. Or about 13 years. So this is the situation as far as economy of Turkey is concerned. Turkish economy is surviving because of swaps with Qatar and some other countries, and resilience of the Turks, including Kurds. In some ways, Kurds and Turks are similar, that they can suffer a lot of hardship and continue with their heads high.
That's a very interesting point. If I can come back to you, Ms. Bodette, where is the Kurdish army, I mean, the Syrian Democratic Forces, where do they get their funding from? Where do they get their arms from? Who backs them and keeps them, in fighting fit against the Turkish forces?
Yeah, so for the SDF, their international support primarily comes from the United States and other countries in the global coalition to defeat ISIS. But all of that support has been very specifically directed towards that narrow objective of the counter-ISIS campaign. So when Turkey attacked the SDF and the Syrian Kurds in 2018 in the region of Afrin in northwestern Syria, and then again in 2019, after the temporary withdrawal of US forces, the international coalition was not supporting the SDF in their fight against Turkey because Turkey, of course, is a member of NATO and an ally of the US and Europe. So this makes the situation very complicated. And I think this is why the US and some European countries have started to come around to the importance of the peace process in Turkey for stability in Syria, because they don't want their NATO ally and their counter-ISIS partner to fight. And honestly, these Turkish interventions and the international community's sort of inability to react to them in the way that they might have otherwise done has had really detrimental impacts on the fight against ISIS, on stability and security in Syria, on prospects for reconstruction, on issues like migration, because many people have been displaced. And so right now, I think we're starting to see from the US, from some European countries, a little bit more engagement in finding political solutions to the Kurdish issue, whether that is maybe behind the scenes pushing, I think, a bit for the peace process, whether that is the more open engagement in bringing the SDF and the transitional government in Damascus together to make a deal that includes the Syrian Kurds.
But
and
that
their
is a
political
deal
project.
that Turkey will be managing, or will it be a deal that Ocalan would like, or be leaders
So
from
I think the deal in Syria, that was, to my knowledge, first and foremost, it was the initiative of the SDF and the transitional government. The transitional government does not want to fight the Syrian Kurds. The SDF is the biggest armed force in Syria right now. Their system of governance is stronger than the system of governance of HTS, which is the sort of Islamist hardline group that took over the state and where, Syrian President al-Shara comes from. They would not be able to, on their own, win a conflict against the Northeast. And any conflict would be extremely destabilizing when their goal, first and foremost, as I think our other panelists said, is investment and reconstruction. So it's not in their interest to fight. It's not in the SDF's interest to fight. And they've been deconflicting actually since the start of HTS operations in late November. So first and foremost, neither side wants a war here. They want to make a deal. Second, I think the United States and other global coalition countries, looking at the potential that you have on a Syrian government that does come from these radical groups, the benefits for stability and security of this deal are there. And I think there's also a lot of international opportunities right now, for countries that want to see Syria being peaceful, stable, representative of all its components, and not run by, real radical fundamentalists, any countries with those kinds of interests, should be really looking into supporting negotiations, helping the SDF, really enforce that deal that they've gotten, and pushing for peace in Turkey as well. Because I think Turkey was sort of, taken almost by surprise by this agreement. They sent Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister, to Damascus right after it. I think they didn't necessarily get everything they wanted. I think they might have compromised by allowing this to happen. And I think their sort of acceptance of this deal is one of the outcomes of Öcalan's offer and, the beginning of negotiations. So it's
That's
not
very
set in
interesting.
stone yet, but we'll see.
But Brigadier, if I could just also take this point a little further, are the Kurds actually compromising then? I mean, what will they get in return for doing a deal with Ahmad al-Shara when Turkey clearly isn't, going to allow it to, I mean, it may not or may not, but will it allow the Syrian Kurds, the kind of space that they need? Because, and Rojava, what happens to Rojava? Is it going to be, allowed to continue in the way it is?
Ma'am, it's axiomatic that Kurds probably today are the largest minority in the world, or largest sort of a community in the world which doesn't have a state of its own.
That's right.
And that is partly because all four countries where the Kurds live disagree on many things, but agree on one thing: not to let Kurds have a state. So that's why, because otherwise all four will have to leave parts of their territory to the newly created state.
This
So
is Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran.
Iran, yes, all four, and these are contiguous areas. You see, so Turks, by virtue of their population, by virtue of their homogeneity, by virtue of their size of the population, by size of territory, by the economy that they can generate over there, they qualify. They meet most of the requirements of a state today, as defined in political science. So, and they are the largest community which doesn't have a state of its own in the world. So that is one part which is undeniable. The second part is this: that all four countries repress them in some way or the other. Some more, like Turkey, because they have more power; others less. As far as Rojava is concerned, it was a beautiful sort of a experiment wherein people had oil fields in northeast, east of Deir ez-Zor, and they had gas and oil and gas. They had coalition support, American troops on ground to help them. In Kamishli and all that, Russians had their base. So even Russians were a deterrent to Turkey, from launching their attacks in northern Syria. Now, all that is there. And Turkey today would try and do its best to make sure that the SDF doesn't get a very good deal. Now, what would thinking from here, what I can say is that what the SDF would like to look for. SDF would like to look for a kind of autonomy like the Kurds in northern Iraq have. They would like to have social, cultural, and language rights so that they can, educate their people properly and all this. They would like to have adequate control of or adequate resources. They would like to have the control over the waters of Euphrates and Tigris,
Yeah,
which Turkey has been
Dam.
denying. Which Turkey has been denying to both Syria and Iraq by making dams, by making the GAP project over there. So they would like to have all this. They would also would like to have the possibility of Kurds from Iraq or Turkey coming and staying with them, exchanging cultural, cultural, educational, and social connections and all that.
That'd be interesting.
But Turkey would definitely not like this to happen, because Turkey feels that PKK, when under pressure from Turkish armed forces in northeast of Turkey, would definitely escape to SDF areas and all this. So even after they make a deal with Öcalan, I'm sure that Turks will not trust Kurds. And the reason is simple. Even if you go to Ataturk's time, who was a secular person and there are many people who respect him. I respect him tremendously as a soldier and as a leader of a nation who created a modern Turkey. But even at that time, they are not looking for, they are looking for homogeneity in the Turkish society. And they call it mermer, marble. They want the Turkish society to look like marble. They do not want Turkish society to look like stones of different colors. And in that,
That's a very nice allegory.
and in that they would like. That's why they have also been denying rights to not only Kurds but to Alevis as well. And that's why we had large number of sort of massacres in Turkey.
That's right, of the Alevites.
Genocide like the 1915 genocide of Armenians, then the Edirne riots, the Savaş riots, and those kinds of things. And what has happened to Diyarbakir and many other places in the northeast is, of course, is a modern day history, so everybody knows that. So therefore, Turkey will do its level best to make sure that the SDF gets the minimum possible breathing space, even in Syria. And Ahmad al-Shara, being indebted to Turkey for all the support that he got, probably is going to listen to them to the extent possible, unless the others press them. Unfortunately, today, Kurds do not have many supporters, even in the Arab world. And as far as Europe is concerned, although it's a fond hope that America and Europe, being the champions of human rights and things like that, would back for them, but they will not. I'll tell you the reason why they want Europe today, feeling a bit of a pressure from Trump's regime, Trump's administration, is looking for security partners.
Yes.
And being part of NATO and being their neighbor, Turkey is one of the options they're looking for. They also do not want the refugees, be it from the Middle East, be it from Afghanistan, be it anywhere, because Turkey is actually the gate for refugees that opens the Europe. And that's why they've been giving them $4 billion a year for the last couple of years, to stop the refugees there. Now, Turkey has this, Turkey can blackmail them by saying that I'm going to open the floodgates.
Absolutely.
So there are many issues involved. And as long as Russia does not Russia and Europe do not reconcile with each other, control over Dardanelles and Bosphorus Straits gives Turkey a very big, brownie points to really score over Europe. So Europe today needs Turkey more than Turkey needs Europe.
That's a very interesting statement, because that's exactly what I was going to get to, because I was reading up on this, and it was I was reading up on how the Kurds themselves had gone to the European Union Council, and there are questions about the human rights violations against them in Turkey, and all of this is going to come up in the next couple of days, apparently. Ms. Bodette, would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that what my co-panelist has said is all true, that, historically, Europe has seen Turkey as a bulwark against Russia. And now with changes in US policy, meaning that Europe can't so much rely on US security guarantees, Europe is going to find itself reaching towards Turkey again. However, I think that approach is not necessarily going to work out as Europe would want, because support for Turkey at this point in time could actually make a lot of these problems worse. We've seen in Turkey that they've moved closer to Russia, even in spite of significant European and US support.
But they've also moved closer to Ukraine. I mean, they've done both.
Exactly. And this is their, strategy that has worked for them. I think it's always a question of, when is going to be too much or too little. And I think the outcome in Ukraine, the sooner or later there's a settlement there, will have a lot of impacts on this. So, there are concerns with Russia. On the migration issue, I think there are a lot of concerns. Some of the things that Turkey wants, like EU membership, that would make it a lot easier.
Will it get EU membership?
I highly doubt that, because if they get EU membership, then anyone in Turkey will be free to go to Europe. And I think Europe doesn't want that very much. There's also the fact that with the economic crisis, worsening political conditions in Turkey, many people from Turkey, are starting to flee. And instead of Turkey being a destination country for refugees, particularly if Syria stabilizes, if there is no more war in Syria and Syrians are able to go home, those dynamics are going to change too. So there are risks with working with, a very authoritarian system. And I think that, if I were advising European governments, and, when I do speak to people over there, what I say is that Turkey is a better ally against Russia and a better check on irregular migration if there is a political solution to the Kurdish issue, because that solves, some of the reasons why people are leaving Turkey. It solves some of the destabilization in the Middle East that's exacerbating the refugee crisis. And the people in Turkish politics who are the most anti-Kurdish, 30, 40 years ago, those people used to be closer to the US and NATO. Now, the people who are the most anti-Kurdish tend to be closer to Russia and have a more, they look in that direction. So I think
that's a
that
very interesting dynamic. You're actually saying that people no longer look at the Kurdish people as the a blight, but they are, getting, more interested in working with Russia. Is that something
I
which
think
is
what I'm saying is the sort of the nationalist kind of, very extreme segment of Turkish politics, the most anti-Kurdish, the most anti-Alawi, anti-all minority community, that segment in Turkish politics is starting to, see itself as sort of closer to Russia than closer to
that's
the
interesting.
United States. And obviously, Turkey is always going to balance. I think Turkey now sees itself, it spent decades as a sort of NATO proxy, if you will. And now it sees itself not as a US proxy or a Russian proxy, but as, an attempt to, it wants to be, and I think Erdogan certainly wants to be, the regional power, right? And their competition
Yes.
with Iran comes in there. And I think, part of why Erdogan's doing this, if we can return to that point, he is
Yeah.
looking at Israel, he's looking at Iran, he's looking at changing dynamics in the Middle East. He knows that if there is conflict in Iran, whether Israel attacks or they're weakened, particularly after the weakening of their proxies in other parts of the region, the most organized community in Iran is the Iranian Kurdish population.
I
There
see.
are, I think, something like 14 million Kurds in Iran. It's the second largest Kurdish population after Turkey. The first ever Kurdish state, the Republic of Kurdistan in Mahabad, which existed for a couple years in the 1940s, was in, the Kurdish region that's part of modern day Iran. It's always been a center of Kurdish nationalism and Kurdish resistance. And we saw in 2022, if you remember, the Women Life Freedom uprising, was started after the murder of a
Masami.
Kurdish woman, by the military police, the Iranian police. And then it's the largest actions and, the most sustained protest actions were in the Kurdish regions because
Yes.
Kurds were protesting, not only the treatment of women, but the general oppression of the Kurdish community. So Erdogan is afraid that if there's conflict in Iran, Iranian Kurds will do what Iraqi Kurds and Syrian Kurds did when there was instability in their countries and finally create their autonomous region. So he wants to sort of get the Kurds, on Turkey's side, so to speak,
Oh.
before that conflict might happen,
But if
before,
the Kurds understand that this is what is driving him, why would they trust him and go ahead and make any kind of deal with him?
I think that, just like Turkey or like any actor in the international system, they look at all of their interests. And I think they see the interest of, if this issue can be solved in Turkey now, then the possibility of Turkey being maybe not amenable, but at least not hostile to Iranian Kurds could be an asset, as then Turkey and Kurds would have a shared interest in countering
So
Iran. I
basically
think
what
we
you're
can look
saying
at,
is, so you're
sorry, go
basically
ahead.
saying that, with all these deals that Turkey's made now with Ahmad al-Shara and possibly with the Syrian Defense Forces, even though there's continuing conflict, and then with the Kurds in Turkey itself, the next step could be bringing in the Iranian Kurds.
I think that that's very far in the future, but the idea could be, I think what Turkey is worried about is the idea that the Iranian Kurds will do something and Turkey will have kind of no say in it or no
I
relationship
see.
there. So they're trying to counter that. And then, the Kurdish movement, I think, is trying to save up strength and, focus their resources, they're thinking about that potentiality too, because they know that in Iran, that they are the most organized and that they're the most capable of creating, a kind of alternative like they did in Rojava in northeast Syria, that's not just Kurdish self-governance, but that also defends the rights of women, defends the rights of all people to practice their religion. So I think everybody's looking at the possibilities because the Middle East is changing right now.
Yes,
the global order is
absolutely.
changing. We're not living in the Cold War system. We're not living in the sort of unipolar moment after the Cold War. There's a lot of instability, but there are also many options. And I
But
think
it's
that
global disorder, I think, more than
yeah,
anything else. And
exactly.
will Turkey be amenable to actually playing a bigger role in the peace deal that is underway between Ukraine and Russia? I mean, I'd like both of you to answer this because the fact that Turkey is by far the only country that seems to have a line of communication with Russia and with Ukraine is quite interesting.
I think, let me just take it on. If you remember, when the war started in 2022, Ukraine was the first country to support Ukraine was Turkey with its Bayraktar TB2 drones, and also subsequently gave Bayraktar Akinci attack drones. It could have given them more, but they were also busy selling it to many other countries. And therefore, they could not have met the orders. But they are in the process of establishing a factory of Bayraktar drones in Ukraine. While they also stopped Russian naval ships transiting between Mediterranean and the Black Sea under the Montreux Convention, which they are entitled to. If the two countries are at war, they can stop the military vessels passing through the straits. And they exercised that. They did not let any the Russian naval ships go through Bosphorus and Dardanelles straits. That was number two. Number three, when the opportunity arose to work out a deal for grains, Ukrainian grains to be exported, it was Turkey which took the initiative and started off the Istanbul talks.
Yes.
Also, Turkey was the one which offered talks at Istanbul between Ukrainian and Russian delegation in the initial stages for a ceasefire. So Turkey has been very active, and actually Europe is also even today, looking at Turkey as one of the interlocutors. They have burnt all their bridges with Russia. In any case, they would like to look for somebody who can also convey their point of view and probably bring a kind of a via media wherein they can, forced by circumstances and Trump, they also need to be involved in this. So I think they find Turkey to be an important place. But also, please understand, there are very many contentious issues and between Turkish ambitions and what the world is ready to agree. For example, the Turks are very actively today are working on opening the Zangezur corridor or Zangezur.
Yes.
This is between for joining Nakhchivan autonomous region of Azerbaijan with Azerbaijan mainland through Armenian territory. Now, Armenians, of course, are opposed to it because this will basically amount to vivisection of Armenia.
Absolutely.
But as far as Turkey is concerned and Aliyev in Azerbaijan are concerned, they are actively pursuing this. When Hakan Fidan went to Washington recently, one of the issues talked there was this issue.
This is the intelligence chief
Exactly.
who's now the foreign minister of Turkey.
Exactly. So what Turkey, of course, is looking for is that this corridor gives them access to CAR or the Turkic states. An organization, that Organization of Turkic States includes Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and
all the stands, yes.
Azerbaijan and Turkey. So Turkey considers these countries as their backyard. They want to have a permanent influence over there. And these countries, of course, so far the problem has been that these countries do not want to replace one big brother with another. And the one big brother was the old Soviet Union. So they don't want to replace that. But all the same, they are still carrying out joint exercises. They are exchanging military equipment. their cultural and economic relationship with Russia.
But
Another issue is
but won't the EU be cashing in big time then? Because I mean, if Turkey does have a relationship with the Turkic states and has influence over that, that will sort of work in their favor with for both Russia. I mean, to keep Russia at bay at this point.
You see, it might, but at the same time, it will strengthen Turkey to the extent that Turkey will stop listening to Europe at all.
Mm.
So it's not a zero sum game. It's a mixed kind of a picture. The fact of the matter is that Russia, as a single country, Russia is the largest economic trading partner with Turkey. Close to
I
70
see.
odd thousand Russian women or even more are married to Turkish men. So in places like Antalya, there is a separate colony of foreigners, colony in which most of them are this Russian girls married to the Turkish men. So when the Syrian war was going on, then Turkey was a little in a bit of a doghouse. That time, I think the trading relations with Russia and Turkey were great. So today, I mean, Erdogan, you can trust him to shift his positions. Tomorrow, he might go against Russia and all that, particularly when Russia gets weaker. So he can go against them. You can trust him to do that. But at the moment, he has good relations with Russia and is benefiting from it. He's not giving any extra bhav to Russia, so he has no problem with it. It also earns him brownie points with Europeans.
Yes.
So he's happy. Now he's the biggest source of his strength today, actually, for the last couple of years, has been his defense industry. You see, I was there in Turkey sometimes in 1999 to 2002. At that time, Turkey was importing quite a lot of weapons, but it made beautiful use of something called an offset rule, wherein whenever they bought some weapons, they also bought technology with it, and they also made sure that the contracting party also buys some defense equipment from Turkey. So the Turkish defense industry grew rapidly. And now they have three of their main Turkish industries, which are part of top 100 companies in the world. And these are Aselsan, which is a complete defense weapon system. Then one is Bayraktar, Baykar, which makes these Bayraktar drones.
The drones.
And third, of course, is Turkish aerospace industry. And so they are making their own ships, they are making their own tanks, they are making their own aircraft, they're making so many things. So, and last year, in 2024, the defense exports was $7.2 billion, a jump of 29% over the previous year. So they are a major player, defense player. And that is why on basis of that, now Europe probably needs them more because Europe has emptied all its sort of inventory and sent them to Ukraine.
That's right.
And if America is trying to distance itself from Europe, then Turkey would like to fill that void, and Europeans would like to benefit from that.
That is a very interesting point, actually.
And
that's exactly what I was working towards. The next question from me was about what is the relationship going to be, between Turkey and Washington, and how much of a, free hand will Washington look the other way if they go back to, attacking the Kurds, is what I was going to ask.
I don't know, particularly when you see Mr. Trump's philosophy. To him, nobody else matters. To him, America first and Trump first. So from that point of view, he can, if he could abandon SDF in Syria, he could abandon Kurds in other states as well. So frankly, not much. You see, Turkey and US have their own dynamics. In any case, in the previous regime in power, Mr. Biden would not even talk to Erdogan, and the relationship was bad. But these are two strong men, Erdogan and Trump. And Trump, since he's more interested in American affairs, he doesn't mind somebody else dealing with their own regions in the way they like. So from that point of view, it's okay. But Erdogan, for example, wanted sanctions to be lifted when they were imposed when they bought S-400 from Russia. Now, that hasn't come about, but it can come about. In fact, there are hints that they are ready to sell F-35 to Turkey. Whether F-35 is a good weapon, whether Turkey should even think of buying it is a different matter. But the very fact is, politically, it's a big signal that if America, lifts the sanctions and permits F-35 to be bought by Turkey, basically because first Turkey had already invested some money in F-35. Secondly, TAI was making some systems of F-35, so it was integrated into F-35, supply chain. So from that point of view, it will be a great signal.
That's a very interesting signal. Ms. Bodette, if I can bring you back in, so do you believe that Turkey is a trusted NATO ally? I mean, will it be trusted to going forward, as the Brigadier said, with all these arms deals and so on and so forth, especially because now Washington is talking about reducing its footprint in Europe, and, the 100,000, NATO troops who are there will probably be, halved, or God knows how many bases will get closed. I mean, there's Incirlik Air Base, which still functions in Turkey. I remember visiting it during the first Gulf War. So what do you see Erdogan's role, going forward? Will he be the NATO's voice and, tool to basically tackle Russia, or to talk to Russia and sort of handle the Ukraine crisis? Because now Russia, which has got 6,000 nuclear warheads, is clearly saying it will not hand over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility back to anyone.
Yeah, I think that in terms of US policy, we're going to see the US pursuing more transactional relationships with everyone, whether that's Europe, whether that's Turkey, whether that's, new states that they're negotiating with, like Russia. Trump is going to be looking at a very narrow set of US interests. Does this protect US national security? Does this save the US taxpayer money? Things like that. And so I think that as Europe might move closer to Turkey, for the reasons mentioned, like defense cooperation, I think the US is going to maintain, the kind of relationship with Turkey that it has increasingly had, where there is cooperation on some issues, but real divergences and interests on other issues. And I think if we look at what this administration has said about the Middle East and what it's been doing, they want to get US troops out. They want to end endless wars. They want to make agreements. And so I have some optimism that they will support some sort of agreement in Syria, prior to a withdrawal, because they don't want to see ISIS coming back. Counterterrorism is a big focus for this administration. Trump, when he talks about conflicts during his term, he'll often say, there was no war except we defeated ISIS. Now, obviously, I think we can look at the situation in 2019. But I think, from my conversations with people who worked in that administration, with people who were in Washington at the time, I think the US really learned what not to do from that 2019 experience. And so I think we'll see probably some more interest in, yes, collaborating with Turkey on some things, but also pushing back where Turkish interests and US interests don't align. Because to your point on Russia and Ukraine, I think, as I said earlier, Turkey for a long time was a junior member of the US NATO bloc.
Yes.
But now it's reached a status, and the international community, the international situation has shifted such that it wants to be a more independent power, with its own set of interests. Now, sometimes those interests will align with those of the US, and sometimes they will diverge. And so I think we're going from a relationship of sort of, very thorough, continuity, congruence on a wide variety of issues, to real convergences of interests and real divergences. And so I think that that's how that
the
will
other
be.
way, Ms. Bodette? Will Washington turn a blind eye if Erdogan goes after the Kurdish people again?
I can't say, but I do think that they are trying to prevent that from happening. I think it's not a coincidence that this peace process and the Syria deal are going on now. And I think the US is engaged with that. Of course, there's no telling what will happen. Honestly, in the US, people are so preoccupied with domestic politics right now that everyone might look the other way. They're looking the other way on even larger issues in the headlines, like Russia and Ukraine, or Israel and Palestine. But I do think we're seeing from this administration and from sort of the bipartisan consensus in the US that it's just not in the US interest for the Turkish-Kurdish conflict to resume and escalate.
That's interesting.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
I
very
think that
interesting.
there'll be diplomatic efforts to prevent that.
But Brigadier, if I can just bring you in, I'm running out of time. Where does this leave India? India has such a good relationship with Russia because it's an age-old, relationship. Depends on they stood by us through, through thick and thin. But right now, should Delhi have its antennae up about the rise of a state like Turkey, which is cashing in on its Islamic credentials by appealing in through the Turkic states and to a great extent, I think in Syria and and Iraq, where apparently it has got plans to knock off the Iranian-backed regime there as well. Should India be concerned because Turkey has always been a very close, has maintained a very close relationship with Pakistan, and also recently we had Ursula von der Leyen, the EU chairperson, visiting India, which sort of seemed to hint that India could be building bridges with EU as well. Do we have a role at all to play? I mean, I assume it's still, it's still a very, very nascent kind of relationship.
Ma'am, Turkey, many people in Turkey go back to the Ottoman times and feel that they're entitled to have the similar kind of influence globally, wherein starting from Maghreb to Hejaz to Horn of Africa and right up to the gates of Vienna and right into Caucasus and Crimea and all that, they used to, rule the entire space. And so Mediterranean, in any case, is they consider that is Mediterranean. They are the main power of Mediterranean, all around Mediterranean. They also think that CAR is their backyard. So obviously, India has its interests in CAR for historical reasons. India has its genuine interests in West Asia, in MENA region. India has its interest in the Horn of Africa. So obviously, when there are powers which are contending for influence in these in the same area, there will be certain amount of competition. That competition is not always unhealthy, particularly when their efforts in those areas are complementary and are not competing with each other directly. For example, both sides not seeking military influence, for example, both sides vying for more trade. So it's perfectly normal kind of a competitive environment. The problem arises with the mention that you made that many Turks, including their decision makers, have been seeing relationship with India in terms of Pakistan.
Yes.
They bring in Pakistan when they see India. And I personally interacted with many Turks and still continue to do, who have lots of respect for Indian democracy, and they think that the kind of society that India has, there's some echo of it is in the Turkish society as well. That's also not a homogeneous society. Although they want it to look like homogeneous, but they're not a homogeneous society. And so they also see India is growing and that in future they need to have very good economic relationship because part of their part of their geopolitical thinking, geoeconomic thinking is geoeconomic primarily. They want the economy to be strong because Turkish economy hasn't been stable. They've seen many ups and downs. In 2001, for example, the Turkish economy had totally collapsed, and again it is getting bad, very bad. So they are looking at it from there, and from that point of view, we see trade with India is about $10 billion a year. Trade with Pakistan, on the other hand, hasn't reached $1 billion despite special, arrangements and all that. So, but at the same time, they have tremendous amount of military to military relationship, selling ships and drones and buying some other things from Pakistan, for example. So those kind of things are there. Training is there. Everything is there. So there will be competition. The second problem that comes up is that India is being a secular country. Any influence, any pretender from outside who wants to have influence within the Indian society based on religion, India would scoff at that. It won't like it. Erdogan's forces have been trying to do that. Some of his NGOs and all that, Savak and all that, have been trying to cultivate people in India. Erdogan, on the other hand, is also looking for leadership of the Ummah. of the entire Roma. That's why he has been trying to cultivate relations with Indonesia, with right up to Brunei Dar es Salaam, and right up to Sahel region and Maghreb, Morocco, and everything. And that's why he's been interfering in, for example, Libya. So he's been trying to do that. Obviously, that brings us into conflict. But more importantly, the frequent statements that he's been making at the UN and in Islamabad whenever he visits, they have been irritants. But like I initially said, he is a shifty character. And somebody will call him pragmatic. Recently, for example, he has been encouraging the think tanks interaction between the Turkish think tanks and Indian think tanks and all that. Although he has also made a visit to India, in any case, isn't it?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So
that's very interesting.
Therefore, he can shift his position whenever he thinks that the other side is pushing too hard. For example, at the time of Arab Spring, he totally went in support of Muslim Brotherhood, which put him at odds with the monarchies in North Africa and in the Gulf region.
And yes,
and relationship deteriorated like anything. But of late, he has been trying to make amends with MBS and MBZ, also with Morocco, also with Sisi. So he's trying to make amends with all of them.
But with the UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular,
and before 7th October, he was also again trying to re-establish relationship with Israel. So he's a man who keeps shifting his position. But at the moment, I don't think great chances of India-Turkey relations improving very much, because this man can't be trusted to follow a consistent policy.
That's very interesting. So we have to wrap up.
He's too opportunistic, and it is because of his opportunism, where he's tried to make use of, with his chutzpah, he tries to make use of this total turmoil in the global system to extend his influence everywhere, which our co-panelist was trying to indicate. He's trying to become an independent player. So therefore, I don't think Indo-Turkish relations are going to be very smooth even in the coming years, unless there's a regime change.
Ms. Bodette, if you can wrap up for us. I mean, the Kurdish people in the last 13 years, have set up a very progressive, democratically run enclave in northeast Syria. And, Ocalan has inspired, the Kurdish people to, fight for a political space in this, kind of multiple enclaves. Do you think going forward, if you can just tell us what you see with the rise of Turkey, will that also, see the rise of the Kurdish people, and also will it bring stability to, to that stretch where right now there seems to be a battle, unspoken battle, so to speak, between Turkey and Iran, and I mean, it's interesting to see this. So where do you see this going? If you can just give our viewers a quick, sort of idea on whether Turkey will leverage its, European and its Eurasian reach to make itself grow as a major power, but will it really take along, the people also with him, the Kurdish people also with him?
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, to wrap it up, this conflict has gone on for, nearly over 100 years, long before the PKK was established. And whatever happens with the PKK and Öcalan's ideas, as long as the political factors, the underlying causes that have driven Kurds to support armed rebellion aren't addressed, there will still be security challenges and conflict related to this issue. That said, if this peace process succeeds this time, if it's different from the attempts at negotiations that we've seen since the 1990s, that will benefit not only Turkey and Kurds, but also the entire region. If Kurds are able to have an impact on political systems in Turkey and Syria with their ideas that you mentioned about sort of multi-ethnic coexistence, women's rights, religious freedom, that will help make it so that, Turkey and Syria as states, I think move back a little bit on some of their more destructive policies. It'll be an example for conflict resolution. It seems like Turkey wants to resolve every conflict in the region and do diplomacy on every conflict except for its own Kurdish conflict. But if they solve that one, they'll gain, I think, even more status and credence as a mediator, which is a role I think they're trying to pursue. And I think it'll really help challenge the sort of hardline nationalism and religious extremism that have caused so much conflict in the region in the first place. So there's a lot of hope if this succeeds. And if these talks do not succeed, then I think we'll see, you know, the conflict unfortunately continue as it has continued since the 1920s.
That's very interesting that you should say so. Thank you very much, Ms. Bodette, for being on the show. Thank you, Brigadier, for coming on the show. I mean, obviously, Turkey is engaging big time with the EU, with NATO, with the Kurdish forces, and the hope that it will, you know, become a major power in the region. But as we say, we have to wait and watch. Thank you, viewers, for watching Global Express. Please click on the new Indian Express icon and share.